Hey there, Lumber Society troops. Camp Master Chris Hyde here, and today I'm bringing you another video. And today's topic is all about shelter. I would say that shelter to me is definitely one of the most vital and the most important things that any human across the planet needs to know when it comes to dealing with the elements and being outside in the environment. The reason why is because the body's ability to thermoregulate is, first of all, it's fascinating the way it works, right? The sweating, the gaining of heat, the losing of heat. And that's what's the interesting thing is actually it all has to do with heat. It's if you're super cold, you need to add heat. If you're super hot, you need to stop adding heat, right? That's it. It's all about heat. And so we're going to talk about how shelters are constructed. Yes. We're going to look at a few different types of examples of structures, but at the same time, I really want to bring to your attention the most important thing of survival, of shelter when it comes to survival, which is that concept of thermoregulation within yourself. I feel truly that I'll just say this. I've been to a lot of survival schools across the country. I've taught a lot of survival classes across the country. And in all of my teachings, there is always this kind of interesting element, which is learn this survival shelter and now your life is saved. Learn this debris hut, or learn this lean-to, or learn this whatever shelter they're advocating for, or whatever tarp shelter or combination with wool blanket they're advocating, right? And I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm not saying that those are good things. What I'm saying is that I think the rudimentary basics of thermoregulation within the human body is first to be understood. So that's what this video is mainly going to be about. It's going to talk a little bit about clothing in addition, but I really just wanted to cover this topic around shelter and how it pertains to our bodies and how to mitigate any type of environmental changes that our bodies go through. So I hope you enjoy this video, and we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to discuss is clothing. All right, clothing, the most important thing that you need to remember when it comes to clothing for survival or any type of outdoor activity, depending on what you're doing, obviously. If you're, going swimming, that's a different story of being outside than, going backpacking in the Tetons. But the main gist of it is warm and dry, right? Warm and dry. That's the most crucial thing that you could possibly need when it comes to the clothing. Because wind, cold, and water, right, that all equals hypothermia every single time. And if you've been to any Buzzmill classes of mine, if taken a first aid class of mine or any of that type of stuff, you know how much I stress the importance of understanding the basics of hypothermia and hyperthermia. Obviously, hyper meaning up, hypo meaning low. So it's an elevation or, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank, or a lowering of the body temperature. Sorry, goodness, I couldn't get that out. So because we're looking for warm and dry clothing, we, in addition, want to also layer that warm and dry clothing, okay? So layering creates dead air space. That's the simple concept. Is so if I've got, a vest on, there's a dead air space in between that. If I've got this shirt on and then I've got another shirt on, we've got a bunch of dead air space that's trapping warm air against our body. Obviously, we're giant radiators. And just to note, the most heat comes from the armpits, the nether region, the groin area, and the head. So that's why a lot of people, wear beanies and hats and things like that, because you're losing and expelling a lot of heat from all three of those areas. So keep those areas in mind when it comes to attempting to, like for instance, people put their hands in their armpits to kind of warm them, or they'll rub their chest and things like that, friction. Keep in mind, if you ever need to warm a body part, right? I'm trying to think about where I'm going with this and what I'm saying, and I've kind of just backed myself in, but we're going to keep it in the video anyway. I don't really care. Just remember this: an expensive jacket does not mean you're going to live, okay? As a young child, growing up, there was this company called Triple Goose Down or something like that, or TFF is all I remember, and it was the biggest puffy jacket ever. And it was all goose down. And I remember going to school one day just wearing a t-shirt. And I put that jacket on. I thought, sweet, it'll be warm all day, right? And then I get to school and we're outside and I'm like, oh man, I'm kind of sweating. So I take the jacket off. Well, as soon as I take the jacket off, I'm freezing. So I put the jacket on, but now I'm sweating. So I take the jacket off. And so you're going to go through this if you're one of those people who's like, I'm just going to wear a t-shirt and my super expensive jacket. You're going to be dealing with that. So what you do is you layer that clothing. You start with something that is like a base layer. A base layer is going to touch the skin. So make sure it's comfortable. A lot of people choose in colder areas. Obviously, we live in Austin, Texas, where it's June and it's hot outside. But you want to consider wool or polypropylene, anything like that, capilene, all those types of synthetic fibers in addition to the wool is really good for a base layer. It touches the skin and you want it to be cozy. That's the most important thing. Next thing is going to be your insulating layer. Your insulating layer is just going to add or subtract to that differential in environment and climate, right? So if you're a little colder, put on the extra layer. If you're a little warmer, take off the extra layer. So that final layer is going to be what we would call the environmental layer. The environmental layer is basically, is it raining, snowing? Like, are you actually facing something that you want to protect that base layer as well as that insulating layer from? Okay, so those are your three layers: your base layer, your insulating layer, and your environmental layer. Okay, now you again, loose, kind of comfy, right? Anything that is causing you distress when it comes to your clothing, stop and fix immediately. If you have ever been on a really long hike or a backpacking trip and you were one of those people who was like, this little blister on my foot's no big deal, I'm just gonna let it go, and then realized, 10 hours later or however many hours later, you're like, dude, I can't even walk anymore. But if you'd have stopped right then and there and just tweaked that or added a little bit of moleskin or something fake on top of that, right? Like, I usually like put a bunch of medical tape in a little ring and just like push that to kind of cushion that, that blister from being rubbed anymore, because that's what a blister is it's constant friction on an area, usually induced with compounded with moisture and heat, right? And that's how the blister forms. But what I'm saying is anything that you find uncomfortable while traveling in the backcountry, stop and fix it, even if it's the tiniest little thing that's rubbing you. Okay, don't let those things go, because they will add up to something bigger. Okay, so keep that in mind. Oh, and by the way, I probably should talk about this because we're in Texas. I find myself pretty much always wearing long sleeve shirts, even in summer. Even when, now, Big Bend isn't open in the summer, and if they are, it's like a real tiny skeleton crew. But if you were to try to go there in the summer, and certain biologists and researchers do, you would be shocked to see almost everybody there is wearing long pants and long sleeves and big hats, right? Now, that's because of the factors of the sun. We have got to protect ourselves from this giant glowing ball, okay? It can be deadly and potentially cause you all kinds of discomfort. Mainly, it's just increasing your body temperature, right? So I won't get into a whole lot of heat exhaustion and heat stroke and all that different type of stuff today, but in our medical video, we'll talk about that stuff. But be aware, if you're interested in more information on thermoregulation, to research how that takes place. So let's talk about a couple types of clothing other than your wool and your synthetics. Okay, so fleece is kind of like, in my opinion, a second runner-up to wool. It's warm, but don't get it near flames. That's that's the one thing I've learned from experience. I have in my notes here is that don't put it near flames. I think cotton in weather that's really cold, Washington State, anywhere north, obviously, I would call it death cloth. I truly would, because it is in cold conditions. I believe it is it's called hydrophilic, if I believe, or hydrophilic. I believe that's correct, hydrophilic, which basically means it holds moisture and water very close to the skin. So you don't want that. You want something in cold weather that pulls moisture and pulls water away from the skin, right? That would be hygroscopic, I believe, if I'm not mistaken on my notes here. I'm totally, hygroscopic, I believe, yeah. So that's what pulls moisture away. It's hard for me to remember all these terms all the time, so I'm totally using notes, y'all. I hope y'all don't shame me for that. Anyway. So a couple of other things, the polypropylene I talked about just briefly, it does hold on to smells pretty tenaciously. That's my experience with it. It does allow a lot of layers to be added though. If you've ever seen like the Patagonia type wear, all those different base layers, I've had up to like 6 or 7 of those shirts on before I was finally like pretty warm. But if I'd have just added 2 and then done a thicker jacket, I'd have been fine. So it does allow a lot of lighter, thinner layers. So if you are one of those people who's looking for something light and easy traveling, I would recommend the Polypro. It is quiet, it's very warm, it's hydrophobic, which again, it means it wicks away moisture. Okay. Silk is good. It's quiet. It's cool. It's warm. It can kind of hold on to some smells too. Polyester is a good insulator. It absorbs water without feeling too cold. It's a good wind stopper too, obviously. Goose down, I like it when it's dry. As soon as my jacket got wet as a kid, that thing was useless. So you know, don't totally you know, discount the goose down, but at the same time, you know, it's not great when it's wet. A couple of other big companies that I think a lot of people confide in that I have experienced and don't really like that much. Gore-Tex, and the only reason is because when you actually try to take Gore-Tex and put it through something that I would consider, let's say, like a 2-week long endeavor, it doesn't actually hold up, especially in Washington weather. It won't. I mean, that they say, oh, wash it in this detergent type stuff and it'll water seal it and all this. Like, if I'm gonna like use something that I really want to repel water, I'm just gonna use rubber. Okay. So what I'm saying is Gore-Tex, it can take repeated abuse, but not extended amounts of repeated abuse. Okay. And it's also very noisy. I keep telling you the quiet levels of this, and the reason I'm telling you those levels is because as an explorer and an adventurer and a wildlife enthusiast, I want to see things up close. And anybody out there who's gotten a glimpse of a bobcat or a coyote or a fox knows it happens that fast. But if you can go out there and you can kind of manipulate what I refer to as baseline, okay, you can make things appear in front of you very easily. Foxes, bobcats, all types of things. You can set bait traps and sit there. And as long as you're quiet and your clothing's quiet and you're, you know, still, right, the animals will come right up to you. One of the coolest things in the world to do is to take a feather, a pretty good sized feather, hang it in like the middle of an area that's kind of empty but surrounded with trees, right? Try and find a way to hang it and just let that thing dangle at about, I'd say 24 inches off the ground, and then set up a game cam. You will attract so many bobcats. It's hysterical how many they really like dangling things, and they'll come over and kind of investigate. So anyway, I'm referring to the clothing only in the fact that I like to watch wildlife and I like clothing that isn't super noisy. So anyway, big tangent. I'm getting back onto survival shelters. You want to keep it dry, keep it clean. Like I said, it protects you, so please protect it, okay? If you get it wet, wring it out, dry it up. You know, be careful about the people who are like, oh yeah, just hang it over the fire. Like, eek. I've done that and I've messed up a lot of clothes, okay? I told you earlier about, you know, different fleece and things like that, right? Wash, if possible, as often as possible. Now, there's some things that people like to mention here, which is keeping clothing clean. A lot of people who are in the backcountry, you know, the only real way to keep clothing, I would say, completely like bacteria free and ridden is either boiling the clothing, which obviously you're gonna fade the colors, right? You're gonna, you know, obviously the reds and all the colors are gonna come out, or using the sun, which is also going to fade the clothing. Okay, so a lot of people choose this route. They will dunk the item of clothing into a pretty hot, almost boiling temperature of water, right? Pull it out, let it cool, then they'll wring the heck out of it, and then they'll hang it in the sun. And if you've ever left anything in the sun, you'll notice when you come back, whatever smell or bacteria kind of beginning to build up on top of that is gone. In fact, that's how I would clean, in addition to tannic acid from oak trees, that's how I would clean my Vibram's 5-fingered toed shoes, was I'd literally leave them out on the back porch in the sun after I would go use them at the lake or whatever for a few days. And I'd come back and yeah, they faded quickly. That black went to gray and almost white real fast, but that stench was never there. I finally gave up on Vibrams because they're just, I put them through hell and they could never hang on. I would bust through a pair in probably less than 30 days. But I work outside, so somebody in an office probably likes those things a lot. Extra is better when it comes to layers, but not always if it's big and it's bulky and it's weighing you down and it's cumbersome to your travels or your endeavors. So consider what exactly you are bringing and how much of it. But I do pack extra clothes, I'm not gonna lie, even though it's a little bit heavy. If you are traveling in an area, I just put this in my notes because one time this is all from my experience. All these notes are from my experiences. If you're traveling in the time of hunting season, maybe consider something orange. I'll throw that out there. So, I first wanted to talk about exposure in general. Exposure is the number 1 killer of people in the outdoors, okay? What I mean by that is I mean people how do I say this? It's hard. I don't want to give any statistics or anything, but what I'm saying is oftentimes people's inability to thermoregulate is what causes their death, whether that be hyperthermia because they're too cold, or hypothermia because they're too cold, or hyperthermia because they're too hot, and that's usually compounded with inadequate hydration. So, you know, there's also that factor. But consider these three these what are called rule of threes, okay? So number 1, you can go about 3 minutes without air, generally, and that's like in a really life or death situation. I feel most adults in their 20s, 30s, and 40s probably couldn't hold their breath for 1 minute and 20 seconds underwater if you're just like, hey, see how long you can hold your breath. But I think in life and death situation, I bet you could push that to as long as you needed to until, you know, but generally the rule of 3 is 3, okay? You got 3 minutes without air. The next is 3 hours without shelter, so meaning direct exposure to the elements, right? 3 direct hours in freezing cold temperatures, you could potentially succumb to either chronic hypothermia or acute hypothermia. In either case, it's kind of crappy. Chronic is more dangerous in my opinion. So you can go 3 days without water, okay? That's another kind of, you know. I think that's a total, you know, that can totally be debated because people from Washington State versus people from Texas, right? They could probably go a lot longer or a lot shorter without water because of their body's adaptation to that particular climate and region. And finally, 3 weeks without food, right? And I think finally the next one would be 3 months without, you know, organized community. You know, there's something to be said about not just being able to get stable. And I think when I say that, I'm really saying psychologically, okay? Psychologically, you begin to defeat yourself and realize like there's just no hope. Fallout 4 fans, think of Preston Garvey. Okay. So the other thing psychologically that we want to talk about is shelter is a place to call home, okay? Anyone who has ever experienced not having a home knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you have ever been lost and you just found a spot to sit, there's something about just sitting down underneath a tree that feels good, right? If you took the time to build a small shelter or build a small fire and sit next to that, it's literally like having a companion. I'm not gonna lie, psychologically, a shelter and a place to call home is so vital to getting yourself out of a survival, situation. So, in addition, the fire too, we'll talk about that in the fire video though. You want a really good night's sleep. That is also extremely important, is to get a really good night's sleep every single night when you're out there doing these types of adventures. Think about it like this. If you're one of those people who doesn't have a really good work ethic and you just kind of throw this shelter together and then all of a sudden you're going to sleep that night and you freeze and you toss and you turn and you cannot get an ounce of sleep, ask yourself this question: how excited are you going to be to get up the next morning and repair that shelter? Right? You're not going to be that excited. You're going to be pissed off. You're going to be frustrated, and you're not going to be having a good time out there. So get a good work ethic as soon as you establish that that's your task, is to build a shelter and build it to the best of your abilities so that it's nice, it's cozy, it's comfortable, and all of that. Then who cares? You can sleep the next 3 or 4 days, whatever, right? But I'm telling you, don't, and I'm the only reason I'm saying all this and stressing all this is because of the fact that I've been there. I've been that guy who was like, whatever, I'll just throw some pine needles on this. And then I froze my ass off, and I got up in the middle of the night and I threw more pine needles on it. And I tried to do that again and again and again. And it was the worst, miserable first debris hut shelter experience ever. But I learned so much from that one. And I learned so much from the next one and the next one and the next one. And after I'd say the first 12 survival huts that you build and then sleep in, especially if you're sleeping in them for more than 3 days, those are going to be the things that lay out every foundation for every type of shelter that you'll ever build. Now, earlier I spoke of not knowing or not needing to know all those different types of survival shelters. I spoke of the understanding the basics of thermoregulation is more important, and we'll get to that in just a second. But to continue going on, lack of sleep is extremely dangerous in a survival situation. Frustration, unclear thinking, clumsiness, depression, death, all of those things, right, are not what you want in a survival situation. You want all the exact opposite of those things. You also get protection from environmental conditions, right? If there's a lot of wind, if you're experiencing rain, there's all these other factors at play that the shelter can provide you with as far as comfort. Animals and insects too, right? You're definitely moving around that much material and making that much noise, and if you're using some kind of tools, you're pushing away all kinds of critters, and they're going to wonder for a bit what you're doing, and eventually they'll come kind of lurking back in there. But when they know the area has been disturbed in such a way, you should be pretty good for a bit, at least the 3 days, and then they'll get super used to you. One time I camped out in a park, and after about 7 days, this fox continued to kind of come around, and I had an experience like this prior too with a friend, but in another time this fox continued to come around, and it got so used to us in both times that it would just kind of walk right by, which I thought was really neato. Anyway, again, I'm a big wildlife nerd, and I just love seeing things that no one else gets to see. It's especially wildlife. They're just so fascinating. I want to know everything about how they live, eat, sleep, drink, raise their young. It's just, wildlife biology is so fascinating to me. So let that be your intro to survival, because now you got a question: how do the deer survive? What do they do for shelter? How do the bears survive? What do they do for shelter? That can help you. I always say to people all the time, if you asked me, if you were like, hey, come on, let's make a bet, and you gave me an option of a naturalist, like a diehard badass naturalist and a badass survivalist, right? I honestly would put my money on the naturalist, because the survivalist has a myopic type of focus for that learning, whereas the naturalist went in with probably a myopic focus, but then realized this whole ecological world and how it all fits together. So for instance, here's an example. The naturalist doesn't need to know how to build a shelter. He doesn't. Why? Because he knows where the deer go and when it's raining and cold, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that our bodies are akin to deer and we can protect ourselves as such, but that little bit of information can potentially be like, well, that's a great spot to build a shelter, is where those deer bed down, right? The same thing with the bears. What do the bears eat? Where are the bears getting? All types of things. So anyway, ask yourself those questions. What are the animals around here doing? And even more importantly, ask yourselves, what did the people who used to live here long before me do? Okay, so do some archaeological study into the natives and the traditional communities that lived near you, and find out what they did. What kind of tools did they need? What kind of resources did they use? What were their supplies, right? All that's going to add and just continue to make your experience in survival that much better. So here's what we're going to talk about when it comes to shelter. Your shelter needs to be able to do these things. Are you ready? Your shelter needs to be able to protect you from the elements and the environments. Your shelter also needs to insulate you from the ground, the wind, the cold, and any bit of moisture. Additional, it needs to be able to shed water. So remember, think, pyramidal roof. A lot of people, I don't know what is the deal with people sometimes, but I've seen so many people build flat roofs when they've built a shelter in survival. I'm like, I don't know. It's whatever, you know. Maybe you like water dripping on you in the night. I don't know, but whatever. Maybe you want to install a pool up top when it's all over. I'm just making dumb jokes. So again, here's something else you can potentially consider, and this we've done this in survival, is we actually trenched around our shelter. So when the water would come in from a different angle or a different direction, right? If it was like actually starting to soak in the ground and the ground is now soaked up so much that the water is actually starting to go downhill, well, it gets into that trough that I built around my shelter, now just completely diverts around my shelter. So consider that as an option. I'm going to move the camera because the lighting's kind of getting a little bit strange on me here. Anyway, so sorry about that, guys. I'm like in a, there we go. Here we go. Better? Is that better? I think that's better. There we go. Sorry about that. So in addition to trenching around your shelter, you also want to think small. I don't know how many people in the world build and consider survival shelters like they need to be the size of your house. That's wildly crazy. First of all, think about the amount of energy that you're putting into constructing something that monstrous, okay? Also, how are you going to heat up all that space, right? That's a lot of dead air space that you're going to now have to heat up. Your body's not that big of a radiator, okay? So you're not going to be heating up that much. So built small. Here's what I always tell the kids in both my summer camps and my nature school. Think of a blanket, not a roof. Think of a blanket, not a roof. What that means is find something that is tight and kind of, you know, a little bit restricting. And those of you who are claustrophobic, this is going to push your edges a little bit, right? But isn't that what we're all here to do on this planet? Is to learn and grow and adapt, evolve, change, right? Become better beings as a species. So what I would like, you know, to see in my own personal stuff is a sleeping bag type shelter. Now what that looks like is something that's small that I have then packed full of leaves and is like a sleeping bag. So when I crawl in that thing, I'm literally moving around in so many leaves that it's almost like cumbersome to even get inside there. But that massive amount of dead air space trapped all in amongst around those leaves, that's what's going to be my insulating layer and my beneficial function of all of that I created, okay? So again, think blanket, not roof. You want to have a sleeping bag type shelter built. Canopies, meaning when you build them, they can keep water out, right? Meaning like if you're building literally in a canopy, but they can also keep water in because the sun never gets there. So consider that factor if you're thinking about placement of your shelter, okay? Well, we're already talking about it, so let's just talk about it. We're just talking about locations of shelter. So I would always say the first 4 things that you need when looking for a survival location is going to be material, water, fuel, and safety, okay? Material, water, fuel, safety. Now, when I say fuel, what I'm referring to is 2 things. I'm referring to both fuel for your fire and fuel for you. That means an ample amount of opportunity for either hunting or harvesting edible plants, okay? So look for those areas. You want to have that. What's that old saying about buying real estate and property? Location, location, location. Same thing with your survival shelter. Location, 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 okay? So you want to make sure, first of all, that you have enough materials. If you go walking around in the woods and you find all these beautiful sets of trees and there's dead logs all over the place, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for lots and lots of opportunity for material. I would not, unless I'm absolutely in dire straits and I really might die, I would never really take down living trees. I've never really found the need to do that. I think, you know, a lot of beginners do that for some reason. I've taught a lot of basic survival classes, and when we would go to the backcountry and we would set up for 2 weeks, I would give the students access to saws, hatchets, you know, all kinds of tools. And then I would find out later, like, it's like a brand new little red oak tree that just got taken down. Who chopped down this live oak tree? And then someone's like, oh, that was me. And then it happens to be the dude from the city who, you know, they don't know. And so just please, while you're on that material search, don't go harvesting dead tree limbs. I'm sorry, don't go harvesting live tree limbs. Look for the dead tree limbs unless you absolutely know, like, I'm not going to make it unless I start cutting down trees. Then by all means, do what you have to do to survive. I would never tell you not to do something if your life was on the line, okay? But consider those couple of things when it comes to location and material selection. So also, high and dry. High and dry means that just like your clothing, right, warm and dry, you want it to be up, elevated off of things. Now, I don't know how many people I've met who the very first time we start talking about shelters, they always ask the inevitable question of like, oh, have you ever put your shelter near a river? And yes, of course I have, you know, because that's what every survivalist does. As soon as they go out and they take their bushcraft bag and they've got all their tools and all their fun stuff, they go, oh yeah, look at this beautiful little water spot and little great blue heron chilling there and beautiful dragonflies everywhere. This is the spot, right? And then they start building this little survival shelter, and then you get a heavy rainstorm, and we get them all the time in Austin, right? We get floods. 100-year floods are like 6 months floods for us. And then the shelter's gone, and you're never going to see it again. All that work you did is gone. So consider where you're building, and do not be building things by a river. I would look up in the trees. That's the first thing I always do, especially, first of all, I talked about trip planning in a prior video, so I'm not going to re-explain all that here. But if you did your prior trip planning, you'll know about what the weather's going to be like, and if there are those types of floods that occur because such and such gets a lot of rain and the rivers swell and it brings water to where you're at, yada, 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 right? Now, with that being said, you want to just, I guess what I'm trying to say is look up in the trees for anything that looks like flood debris, okay? So if you did your research, you know, okay, this area is kind of prone to flooding. Good. Now look in the trees. What do you see? Next time y'all go to a park and you know that that park has, you know, had flooding, I want you to look in the trees about eye level and above. And I want you to start taking note of clumps of things that are stuck in trees. And that's going to be your determination of where that water is going to rise. A long time ago, there was, I think the May, if I remember correctly, or the October 2015 flood, I think is when it was. I was on a friend's property, and his property, it swelled. I mean, we could put in a canoe at where his driveway started descending down towards the creek. We could put in a canoe right there, and we could canoe out into the top of probably, I'd say, a 60 to 80 foot pecan tree. That's how high this water was. So it didn't matter whatever the hell we had built on that property as far as survival shelters, even stuff that was way out of the scope of that creek, it was gone. And it was gone forever, and we were to never see. And it actually brought a cow from the neighbor's property onto our property. We had to get rid of that cow. It was a crazy thing. So floods are dangerous. If I'm saying anything, I'm saying floods are horribly dangerous. Be careful and look out for signs that you would need to know as far as what's flood sign. Okay, sorry, I'm tripping over my words right now. Now, you want it sheltered from excessive winds. Okay, you want it sheltered from excessive winds. The main reason for that, in my experience, is because it just burns a lot of fuel. That's what I've noticed, is like when I would sit in an area that was like, oh, this is nice and breezy in Texas and it's cool. Well, then I noticed I was just like ripping through fuel, and I was like, man, this is not what I want to be doing. So maybe a little bit of a breeze, but also a little bit of a break. Now, there is something to be said, obviously, about a fire break. You could establish one of those, build one of those things. It's literally just a wall that stops the wind. So if you want to go that extra effort and put in that extra energy to build one of those things because you really do like the breeze on your shelter and through your shelter, I would recommend doing that too. So, one of the things that is important is that when it rains, your shelter is going to get wet, obviously. The important thing is to have that shelter have the possibility of drying out. I spoke earlier of a canopy, right? And how a canopy could potentially be great because it shelters most of the rain off, but the rain that then does make it in, it becomes very difficult because it traps all that moisture inside and around your shelter inside that canopy. So again, you want it open with generally, I would say, a southern exposure. What that means is in the high noon, the hottest part of the day, well, not the hottest part of the day, but the sun at high noon is in the south, right? That is oftentimes when, if you remember our navigation class, that's when all the trees, right, are really getting the bulk of their energy from that part of the day. And that's why oftentimes trees all alone in a field will predominantly lean or grow or put branches heavy towards the southern direction. Same thing for your shelter. If your shelter has a southern openness, it is going to dry out a lot faster and be a lot more readily available for you to use after each consecutive rain. This is kind of a, not necessarily a thing you have to do for survival purposes, but kind of more philosophical and intentional purposes. A lot of people like to face their doorway to the east, and I believe that is because you wake up with the rising sun. So kind of as the sun's cracking over the horizon, you're kind of beginning to awake as well. Like I said, I think it's more of a kind of a spiritual, philosophical thing than it is a survival thing. But every survival school that I went to were always like, yeah, put your doorway to the east, put your doorway to the east. It could be that they learned that from a native and indigenous communities tradition, but I'm not really sure. Again, comfortable and cozy, comfortable and cozy. Remember, comfortable is a state of mind, okay? If you don't mind sleeping in sweat and just wherever, you're going to be great at survival. If you're like, I have to have my down blanket, I have to have my contouring pillow, I have to have, it's going to be tough, right? Your level of comfort's way different, obviously. But I would challenge you to start small. What does that mean? That means bring a blow-up mattress next time you go camping, all right? Then after that, just bring the sleeping bag and a little pad. Then after that, literally try to build a bed of leaves, throw a tarp or a blanket on top and try to sleep on that. Just keep upping the ante as you progress through your skill set, right? That's the way everybody gets better. You just keep adding more of a challenge. Now, if you are evading someone or something or some entities, obviously your shelter needs to be secretive, and there is a lot of stuff that we could discuss around that. There are things known as scout pits that I've learned about. There's a lot of other types of way to blend and camouflage shelters. I'm not going to get into that, but it's something to consider. And then finally, the last part is it needs to be in plain sight if that is your plan, which is to be rescued, okay? It needs to be in plain sight. Think about placing it somewhere where almost anyone from the sky can potentially see it. Now, what that generally means is that you're pretty much out in an open field. What that generally means is that you're going to be walking a lot to and from a forest. What that generally leads to is excessive amounts of exhausted energy usage, right? So I would always tell people this: build in what is called a transition zone. A transition zone is kind of like where a big field meets a big patch of woods. And I would build right on that edge. And I always try to find that southward facing side of that forest's edge as well, because of what I talked about in drying out the shelter earlier. Now, the reason I like that is because I'm kind of getting the best of every world. I'm not having to travel far for materials, for fuel, for water, things like that, right? But I'm also getting an opportunity to make myself readily available and seen if I should hear a helicopter or a plane or something that I need to quickly go signal, okay? Having access to a field too also gives you a better periphery, right? On who is out there potentially looking for you, right? So there's a lot, so transition zones, if you can picture this in your mind, edge of a forest, big field, right? Forest, big field, right in the middle there area, okay? Make sure the south, is kind of in that idea. If not, don't worry too much about it, but make sure it gets sun is what I'm trying to say. Now, when it comes to water and continuing on location, and I know this video is getting on, but I really want to give y'all a bunch of information that's good and, it's maybe entertaining. You can listen to this while you're driving to the work or from work or picking up the kids or whatever you're doing. But for water, I always generally recommend 30 to 50 meters away, so about 150 feet away from a big source of water. Now, I would be hyper aware, especially here in Texas, because I've experienced it, of certain types of water that is stagnant. Why? Well, we all know why. Mosquitoes, okay? If you are, and man, holy cow. Well, I won't talk about that story. You want to avoid stagnant sources is all I'm going to say, okay? Fast flowing, moving at all, usually pretty good, clear, great, okay? Again, look for signs of flooding. look for signs of flooding. Where the heck are those signs of flooding? If they're way down by the river and you're way up top, good to go. If they're even more above your head, watch out, okay? I'm not kidding. Floods kill people. We all know this. It's not a joke, okay? Now, for safety, you want to find a good natural shelter area. What I generally do is I start taking my throwing sticks and I just start throwing them into the woods in all different ways. I'll stomp around. Basically what I'm doing is I'm making myself known and myself present. Now, I'm not trying to be, dominating over nature, but I'm trying to more let the snakes in the area know that there's a bigger force out here. And usually that's why hiking sticks, big boots, stomping, that usually the vibration through the earth lets them know there's a bigger creature around, and they kind of amscray. So I don't want to be bitten by rattlesnakes or copperheads or water moccasins or any of this such. So I'll use those tactics only as a way for me to create a safety area, versus me trying to go in there and exert some type of force over nature and say, I'm king of the land. And you get what I'm saying, right? We're trying to live within nature. We're not slash and grab survivalist type mentality people at Lumber Society. We are always kind of go with the flow. Now, look for wasps in the trees. I don't know how many times I literally have been just hanging out near my shelter, and I'll go over to something and like pee, or I'll like one time I threw a backpack over a branch, and there happened to be like at the end of a branch a yellow jacket nest, and it shook it and they all just came out. I didn't get stung, but I saw it and I was like, oh crap. So just be on the lookout for hazards as when it comes to safety. Be on the lookout for hazards. Do be aware that in the ground, I haven't experienced it a whole lot here in Central Texas yet. I think I have one time out near Bastrop. But hornets actually live in the ground. Some hornets, not all hornets, but they can literally just come out and just start blasting you, and you'll quickly realize, whoa, crap, what's going on? And a lot of people don't know that, so they're shocked to learn that yes, hornets can be in the ground. They have ground nests. Okay, you want any type of insect colonies, just avoid, obviously, altogether. Avoid trails and watering holes, mainly because, again, you're kind of encroaching on animal areas, and again, we're not out there to disturb them necessarily. You want to avoid anything that's poisonous plants, obviously. Please, please, please know what poison ivy looks like, and poison oak, and oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the third one. We don't even have it here in sumac. Sorry, we don't even have it here in Austin, so I don't really know it that well. You want to also be careful for dead branches, okay? Dead branches, especially things like pecan branches. Man, you get a good windstorm and these, 800-pound pecan branches come crashing down. Like that's your life's over. It's not gonna be too much fun, okay? And pecans are known to do that. There's a reason the survival community calls them the widowmaker, okay? Also, cottonwoods, for whatever reason, cottonwoods and willows too. I'm gonna go ahead and throw willows in there. That people might be accusing me of something else for that, but I'm gonna throw willows in there too, because I've definitely been in a survival, little camp out experience, and a huge willow tree branch snapped and came tumbling down and almost on top of a friend's shelter. So I'm gonna throw willow in there and cottonwood as well. A cottonwood branch fell in the night at one of our camps the other day, and it was during that big storm that we had last week. And it was pretty, or a week, 2 weeks ago, I don't remember when it was. It was pretty amazing the size of the log that fell. That would have killed easily 4 or 5 people, that log, that it would have fallen on your shelter. It was monstrous. So be careful for the widowmaker, the dead trees in there. I know I'm maybe kicking a dead horse here, and I've said this 1,000 times, but don't forget. You don't want to build your shelter too close to the fire either. Now, amazingly, a lot of people who end up catching their shelter on fire, it's really just lack of common sense in a lot of times, or it's accidental, right? But usually it's the accidental through the lack of common sense. Be careful about fires. Be careful about how big you get your fire, and be extremely careful about wind and picking up embers and tossing them on your structure. Okay, sometimes debris huts are made with ample amounts of debris, meaning leaves, sticks, twigs, and all that stuff. That is like a giant fire just waiting to go off. Now, if you're cold and you're in there, well, let's just say you'll be warm for the rest of your life. Okay. Now, You want to avoid, again, any rocky ground. It's just uncomfortable. I have never, one time in Liberty Hill, I did a 3-day camp out and survival retreat, and I remember I slept on this ledge near the San Gabriel, and it was on this like limestone ledge. And dude, I tried 3 days, all 3 nights. I couldn't sleep on those rocks. They're just so like weird shapes, and just I tried adding leaves, and it just never did it. It never did it. So I ended up going up next, because it was a multiple weekend class. I ended up going the next weekend to slip up further up the hill on the ground. Make sure you can get back to your shelter. This is a story that I put this in my notes because of a story. I got lost one night going to the restroom, totally didn't have any idea where my shelter was at. I didn't want to, excrement super close to my shelter, so I took a good walk, and then I totally got lost in the night. So make sure you can get back to your shelter, please. Okay, so now I'm just gonna real quickly, because I always get questions about this. I always get questions about caves. I don't know what it is with humans and fascinations about caves. I think what it is a cave is a shelter that's like already built for you. Humans are, I say humans are kind of lazy. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but we kind of are, especially in survival, man. Like I get super lazy in survival, I'm not gonna lie. But that's because I feel I'm pretty confident in what it is that I'm doing and the needs being met, right? Now, if there is a cave, first of all, acknowledge that there's probably a lot. Okay, so that's kind of cool to think about. Bats emerge from caves, so be careful. You want to look for bats at dawn and dusk. Obviously, if you walk into a cave that has bats, you're going to smell it probably way before you even consider, is there bats in this cave? That smell will hit you. Anybody who's ever walked underneath or rode or jogged under Congress Bridge, you know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? Okay, you want to be careful. Don't move in with the bats, is what I'm trying to say. Careful of snakes in there too. Obviously, caves are great places for snakes. We don't have bear country here per se. You get out into the mountains in the West Texas area, I would be more conscientious of those types of things. You don't want to travel too far in. Oftentimes there are slippery rocks. There's things that get dislodged. They could trap you in there. All kinds of crazy things could happen. If you're going to go be doing all that in survival, just go slow and explore little bits at a time, going back into caves. I've explored some caves in Montana a few times. There was one of the coolest caves I've ever been to in Montana was, God, I think it was like, it must have been like 28 degrees in there or something, but it was the coolest thing ever. Everything in there was solid frozen ice. And I would definitely, if I was a native person living there in that context, I would have used that thing as like a refrigerator and kept all kinds of food and storage and all kind of neato things down in there. I don't remember where it was in Montana. We were with Tom Elpel on a wild and food and foraging trip, so you can message him and ask him what cave that is particularly. But it was really cool that it was that cold. I didn't even know caves did that. Now, you don't want to, again, go in too deep. You never want to light a fire inside of a small cave, especially near the back. It will use up all your oxygen. If you've ever heard those horror stories of people dying in caves, of asphyxiation and things like that, or not asphyxiation, but just like lack of oxygen, usually those are those stories. You want to kind of put it near the edge of the cave so it's drafting and pulling in air from outside, not using what's in the cave. You want to build the fire. Oh, I just talked about that. Sorry. Avoid any excessive air currents in the cave. And additionally, right, because we talked about air currents being outside. Now we're talking about air currents being inside. Same thing, uses up fuel, all that same stuff. Just be careful. Can get, compounding the wet, cold, all that stuff. You want to, in addition, look and listen before and during the stay. Okay, so listen, look in there, kind of just explore around before you start really moving in, and just be aware is what I'm trying to say. And the reason why there might be a water funnel, okay? Water could rush through that cave potentially at a distant rain, like all of a sudden you don't know what's going on, like way far away, and suddenly you're like, just flooded out. Climb higher, to see if there's any signs, around there, or wet rocks of water seepage. That could be an indicator for you. So just kind of like, obviously be careful climbing, but kind of poke around in there a little bit. I would not enter old mine shafts. People ask that also too, old mine shafts. I wouldn't do that. That seems extremely dangerous. It just seems like an accident waiting to happen, or whatever. It's bad air, falling timber, mine shafts, right? Collapsing passages, all those different types of things. if you're on a coastal area, like let's say you found a coastal cave, just be aware of tides in that regard. And that's all I'll say to that. So, finishing up what this whole discussion is about, which is shelters, and really more importantly, the way the body regulates warmth, okay? That's what we're going to talk to now, okay? We're going to talk to how we lose and gain heat. This is the most important part of this whole video. So if you want to skip to this part and watch no other part, here we go. Conduction, okay? Conduction is the transference of heat through direct contact, okay? So my face touching my hand is a form of conductive heat, right? My hand is 150 degrees and it touches my face, it is going to burn my hand, okay? Now, let's not forget though, physics. The way conductive heat works is by mass. So obviously, my mass is not as great or greater as the Earth's mass. So if I lay my warm body on the cold Earth, who's gonna win? Well, the Earth, because its mass is greater. If I go near a gigantic block of ice the size of a building, okay, it's gonna win, right? My warm body, eventually my warm body will, probably get through it, but I'm gonna get way too cold before that even happens anyway. So always remember mass. It is really important to think about that. A lot of people, I don't know why, they just forget that sometimes. So how do you stop that conduction of gaining heat? Well, that's simple. Put distance between you and it. That's it. So if you're freezing on the ground and your body heat is being robbed from the Earth because the Earth is colder, right? What do? You insulate. You simply put a barrier between you and yourself. That's it. Okay? Now, the next type is convection. Okay? Me sitting right where I'm at and a giant wind gust constantly going across me. That's cold air or hot air, depending, whichever. That's a form of convection. Now, you can both transfer heat, right, through that way. And you should also do that through liquids, right? It's also a kind of like, if you obviously, yeah, I guess that's technically convection though, or conduction. I don't know. I think it's a form of both, but I could be wrong on that. Somebody in the comments tell me, is water around you a form of convection or a form of conduction? I think it's convection, but I could be wrong. Anyway, let's just talk about it. So non-permeable surfaces is the solution, right? So things that cannot get through. So standing behind a wall, right? Standing behind a big wall of trees or in the line of a forest. So as soon as you're in that big field where all that wind is at and just totally robbing you of all your heat, you get into that forest line and now that forest has blocked all that wind. Okay, so that's the only way to mitigate that, is to put something between you and the wind or the convection, okay? The next type is radiation. Radiation comes in two different types. We've got long waves and short waves, okay? Long waves are gonna be things like fire, sitting next to a fire. And I know that sounds weird because it seems like long waves would come from the sun, but it's actually opposite. Short waves come from the sun. And ultraviolet radiation is most around midday. So from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., that's going to be your ample amounts of the most amount of radiation, UV radiation. So be careful. 80%, 9 to 3 p.m., somewhere around there. And again, what's the fix for that? Right? Well, same thing. Shade, right? Shade would be to stop that radiation from contacting the body. So any type of barrier, okay? Any type of barrier, meaning shade, right? Trees, covering, tarp, blanket, whatever you can string up to stop that sun from beating down on you. Same thing with the fire. Obviously, fire is like, just walk away, man. Just walk away from the fire and you're fine. Or get closer to the fire or build the fire bigger, right? Obviously. So evaporation is going to be the fourth one. And that's going to be losing heat through conversion of a liquid into a gas. So obviously, what does that mean? Sweating, okay? So sweating, 2.6 million sweat glands is on your body, every single person's body, probably more or less, depending how big you are, right? And the fix for that is obviously to stay dry. That's it. It's just to stay dry. So unless, well, now that's why these topics are always so interesting, because you get into one and you can start, now I could literally start talking about dehydration and all that stuff, but I won't even talk about it. I'm just going to keep going. The next one is respiration. Respiration is losing heat and water, right? Water vapor, technically, through breathing. So actually sitting there doing nothing, you are creating heat, and you are also losing heat, okay? You're doing it both, okay? Now, losing heat is basically the key component of this whole discussion. Or, I'm sorry, gaining heat, right? So how to stop gaining heat. I didn't mean to say losing heat, and I'm starting to get that weird light again, so I'm going to change the camera. There we go. Now, what I would like to say is I'd like to read you a quote, and that's it. This quote should sum up and encompass every last survival class that I've ever been to on survival shelters. Okay, here's the quote, and I'm pretty sure this quote comes from Cody Lundeen, the barefoot guy from Dual Survivor. I'm pretty sure this is his quote. So here we go. By recognizing and understanding the following general physics involved in heat loss and heat gain, the survivor can intelligently assess virtually any situation that has been placed before them and, one by one, manage those problems. Okay? Knowing these simple laws in advance allows the wise person to prepare accordingly and mitigate any potential breaches to thermoregulation long before they happen. So, hit pause, rewind, and listen to that again, and listen to it again, and then go back and listen to the discussion about conduction, convection, radiation, perspiration, evaporation. If you can figure out how to manage every single one of those things, you do not need to know how to build a survival shelter, because intrinsically and intuitively you will know what to do. Gaining lots of heat through sun contact or through sunlight, put something over you. Go into shade, right? Standing up on top of a mountain, freezing to death because of wind, get off the mountain or get behind something, right? It's these simple little things. But I don't ever want to tell somebody, you need to build this shelter to survive, because I think that's nonsense. I'm not saying that not building a shelter is nonsense. What I'm saying is, if you have to build a shelter, then build the shelter. But consider how you're gaining and losing heat first. Then build the shelter accordingly, right? Because you're trying to maintain and preserve your energy, okay? You're trying to maintain and preserve your energy. That's why I felt like when I went to a lot of these survival schools, they would do these things where they'd be like, okay, go build a survival hut, go build a shelter. And like a lot of the people, they didn't really know what they were doing. And they were spending hours and days, I'm not kidding you, days, building a survival structure, okay? It doesn't need to be like that. I would recommend each and every one of you troop members, Lumber Society, Buzzmill lovers, to go out and just build a shelter. Here's what I would bring along with you. I'd bring along your bushcraft bag. Okay, so we've talked about our bushcraft bags. And in here, I've got my metal water bottle, I've got my tarp and my blanket, right? I've actually been sitting on it the whole time. And I've got my knife, I've got my saw, I've got a really good pair of work gloves. Folks, do not discount these when it comes to building a shelter, okay? These are a lifesaver. Here's why. A couple things. Those of you who are afraid of snakes and all that, now you don't need to be. Well, I'm not saying a venomous bite from a snake is not going to get through a glove. What I'm saying is it's just a protective barrier over your hand, so now you can do more. You can break more branches. You can scoop up more leaves. You can dig more in the dirt. You can do all different kinds of other things when you have a pair of gloves. So please bring your pair of gloves. Now, once you're out there, just build something. Something. I don't care if it looks like, look, can y'all see that thing back there? Right there, right there, that thing. That was just a group of kids came out here and built that. I didn't help them build that. Don't judge that shelter on my bit. No, I'm just kidding. But a group of kids came out here and built that. And they probably learned a lot, right? Especially if you can then build it and then stay in it for a night, you've won the survival lottery, because you're going to learn so much about how to build a survival shelter. So I think I've talked long enough. This has been probably about an hour-long video. I hope you've all loved everything that we've been producing. If not, I would love feedback. I am not a guy who sits in front of a camera and talks all day. This is really challenging for me and kind of awkward, but I'm just pretending like you're all sitting right here in front of me, and that's actually been really helpful. So I would love feedback, meaning you really like the videos, or you wish there wasn't me telling a lot of side stories and tangents, or maybe that's what y'all really like. Maybe you don't want to see my face at all and you want me to like do more building and constructing and things like that and not doing the notes. I don't know. But you tell me, as my audience, right, our Buzzmill Lumber Society family, what you would like to see in these videos and how we're doing. So any feedback would be much appreciated. Without much further ado, I think that's it. I'm going to double check these notes real quick and look over everything. I think just one last thing that I'll talk about. I always mention this in our survival talk, and it's only because it could totally happen to you. I don't know where you go and where you travel, but it may happen to you, and maybe you'll remember this. This is called the 1-10-1 rule. Okay, you ready? 1-10-1. 1-10-1. If you fall into freezing water, you implement the 1-10-1 rule. Here's the 1-10-1. You have got to, in the first minute, control your breathing. So 1 minute to control your breathing. Okay? Now, you have 10 minutes to get out of that water. Okay? Or you will most likely, and we're talking, freezing temperatures here. The one after the 10 is you have 1 hour to warm your body back up to 98.6. Okay? That is the 1-10-1 rule in a nutshell. Now, I learned that a long time ago. So maybe something in the medical world has changed since then. If you know anything more advanced than that, again, leave me a comment in the video. I'd love to hear your feedback. But something to take away in addition to shelter, because the 1-10-1 rule is really helpful, but that 1 hour at the very end, that's where the shelter comes into play. So if you can get something like a couple layers from your sleeping bag, or if you can get a couple layers from whatever, a hammock, a tarp, a wool blanket, there's all these different things. Layer everything up. Maybe if you've got some extra bodies, extra friends, they can jump in there with you and literally like sandwich you. And I know this is going to sound a little bit weird, but the less clothing while the sandwiching is going on, the better, because direct conduction, remember, heat to heat transference, right? So when you get that direct heat to heat transference, your heat's going up, and if it's got to go through the clothes and then through the other person's clothes, and then I'm not telling y'all to be weirdos, but I'm telling you this as an actual professional life and death situation safety measure. Okay, so please don't be weird. Now, one last quote, just in case you missed it the first time. I'm going to read almost the same quote again, but a little bit different. Here we go. Understanding and cooperating with the laws that govern heat loss and heat gain will allow you to assess the options that your environment holds and make informed decisions about where and how to construct a makeshift shelter. That's it. If you watch this entire survival video about shelters and you don't walk away with anything, just remember: conduction, convection, radiation, perspiration, evaporation. Understand how to regulate and manage those, folks. You'll do fine. I hope y'all have a great evening. I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. I cannot wait to see you all in person. It's been way too long. It's been like 3 months and I'm dying. So I can't wait to see y'all. I hope y'all are having a great time out there, enjoying these skills. Send me anything that you've been working on. I would love to see what you're working on. If you're building a bow drill kit, if you built a shelter, holy cow. I would love to give you some kind of kudos on our next video and share your pictures and your images and tell your tale for you. Or have you share it on our, we have a Facebook page, Facebook group now, okay? So you can join that and share anything you want in there. Our next video will be next Thursday. It will be a live stream video from Facebook. We will be doing knots, so it won't be too many knots, probably about 10 or 12 knots. Real simple video, probably about an hour long. Talk a little bit about how to make rope out of natural plants too. I would highly recommend each and every one of you who is interested in that class to go out and purchase something called raffia. Raffia. Raffia is just a great natural source of fiber that you can use in turn to make all natural cordage. If you don't want to use raffia because you don't want to support some kind of company, I would go get a lot of long fibrous individual strands of something that can then in turn be turned into rope. You know, if you have any questions about your material, just take a picture of it or send me an email or something, natureversity@gmail.com, natureversity@gmail.com. That's my email. And I would love to look at what you've got and we'll tell you if it works or not. If you know what dog bane is, you can get some dog bane. If you know what yucca is, you can get some yucca. There's a little bit of processing to do before you just grab those plants and they start making rope. So be conscientious of that. Maybe look up another YouTube video, or maybe I'll make a YouTube video for you on how to do that too. But definitely be aware that we do have more online classes coming up, and we do have more videos like this coming up. And again, we hope you're enjoying them all. So that's it. That brings me to the end of this video. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks again, everybody. Bye, Lumber Society. Bye, Buzz Mill. Master Chris, signing off.